and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Estrella Podcast. My name is Danielle Miranda, and before I begin introducing today's awesome guest, the time is here. The Estrella Beta has launched. If you would like to learn more about the platform and the exciting things that are coming onto the platform, then head over to estrellaadvisors.com, where you'll get all the information and you could potentially be a part of the beta group that has currently launched. Now, for today's guest, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing to all of you spiritualist medium Ash Robinson. Hi, Ash. How are you today?
Hi, yeah, I'm doing absolutely splendid, thank you, and thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited that we finally get to do this interview. I loved actually talking to you prior to scheduling this interview, and now that our schedules have cleared up a little bit, we finally have the opportunity to sit down and chat.
Yeah, feeling is mutual.
Okay. I always ask this question because I've had such an amazing opportunity to interview each and every one of you from all different parts of the world. I can tell that you have an accent. So if I may ask, where are you located?
Yeah, I'm in England, the United Kingdom, and I'm based in South London, in the south of the country.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. How long have you stayed in South London?
Yeah, boy and man, South London and the sort of
Wow.
suburbs of London and sort of south of the UK, Surrey, sort of south coast.
Now, you had said to me that you are a spiritualist medium, but there's also some other things that you're into. May I ask, what are those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an ordained minister of religion in spiritualism, which I'm pleased about. As a happily married man, it means I get to marry other people, men and women, and everyone in between, which is wonderful. And as part of that pathway, I also became a spiritual counselor. So I was able to sort of take my knowledge of sort of mental health first aid a bit of a step further and apply a sort of lens of spiritual counseling too.
If I may ask, Ash, what is the difference between your typical counselor and a spiritualist counselor?
I think that for those that have invested in lots of hours at sort of posh schools and got sort of fancier qualifications, that they'd argue that they're sort of more qualified as a counsellor. But the actual label counsellor, it's applied to lots of things, including at schools, guidance counsellors and other bits and pieces. So as an umbrella term, I proudly sit there. As a spiritual counsellor, we're bound by exactly the same values. It's about helping someone through situations and making sure it's very different from, say, coaching, where we're asking lots of questions or giving advice, and it sort of bridges those worlds. And it's definitely not mediumship. It's not about doing psychic readings for people or giving someone evidence of life after that change that I call death. Spiritual counselling is that opportunity to help people through a situation, to signpost them.
So if I may ask, Ash, what in particular would qualify a man or a woman to seek spiritual counseling?
So sometimes it's exactly the same sort of things that you would seek help for. So could be that you're just feeling a little bit sad, a little bit down, you're having trouble to sort of overcome and adapt to those situations. Within spiritualism, we do attract a lot of people that have just gone through a bereavement. And actually, there's an element of bereavement counselling. It's helping them to understand what happens now after that sort of change that often a loved one has gone through, that we call death. And actually, from a spiritual point of view, it can then segue into a little bit more about the faith and belief system, how to live your life, your spiritual life within that. It could be more practical things, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands and wives have had a bit of a falling out. They're not prioritizing their marriage, and the idea just to be able to talk this through to someone sort of independent that's not going to judge them, that's going to sort of help them there. Often it's an opportunity with the sort of spiritual philosophy to talk about, the best ways of living your life, help someone get to those points.
So it's not like you stated before, you're not doing mediumship in the session, but is there anything that you may offer outside of the spiritual counseling to your clients if you feel they may need that?
What we try and do, and this I think where is your sort of professional standards and your discipline sort of come in, is try and telegraph from quite an earlier stage the difference between all those things. and actually make sure that before a client or a member of the congregation wants to speak to someone, finding out what it is, managing those expectations. Are you looking for proof of life after death? Are you looking to take the next chapter, or you're going through a different season and you want some advice? Are you feeling sad and you want to sort of be able to overcome that, or sort of talk about the feelings? So managing someone's expectations from the beginning. The other thing that's particularly big in the UK is we're regulated from anything which is a sort of charge service as something called the consumer regs. So if someone pays for a service and they don't get it, there's an element that they can sue for that. So the professional standards that come with it is making sure that the person knows what it is they're asking for, what it is they're paying or giving a donation for. Often, a lot of the services we can provide through the church are free of charge to members of the congregation, but there are, of course, people that do this as their full-time job and sort of have to charge. So yeah, getting those expectations right and sort of saying the difference. Sometimes people want a bit of both. They want some bereavement counselling, and then when you plant seeds about there being something, this continuation of the personality, of course, they want to know if that person's around right now. So we sort of say to them, look, let's focus on the counselling. Let's make sure we're not doing anything mediumship or psychic here. If you're interested in finding out more about mediumship or psychic, come to one of our services, maybe an open platform, before you come back for a private reading.
So there is a question that I have to ask. You had mentioned just now the psychic and the mediumship. Does the Spiritualist Church embrace psychic abilities and mediumship?
Yes. And certainly my church, there are various different sort of organizations within the UK and, of course, worldwide that have slightly different values or sort of principles, and some either exclude them from their sort of their individual sort of faith and belief system. But within my churches, I'm based at a church in South London called Wimbledon. That's my mother church, and we've got a little sister church in Hatbridge, a little bit further out to Surrey. We're part of an organization called United Spiritualists, and actually it's a bit of an umbrella for like-minded people to come together. And regardless of the differences, it focuses on the values that sort of bring us together. What we sort of say to people is that, both as mediums and if you like, as members of the congregation, you must know the differences. You must know the difference between working psychically, working spiritually, working as a medium, and that recognize that some of those are ways of practicing our faith and belief system. It's not the sort of core of the religion. So as long as you know what you're doing is psychic, and the people that are in the church are expecting you to do something psychic, then we'd work with that, be that, feeling sort of energy and objects, holding jewelry, giving readings from that, working with oracle cards, or even tarot to a certain extent. All of that's welcome, as long as it's sort of well advertised what it is we're doing and the likely expectation.
That is really neat, because typically, from my experience, church really doesn't embrace that. They don't embrace bringing in those modalities of spirituality into the congregation. So the fact that the Spiritualist Church is open to tarot readings and numerology and things like that, I find very, very fascinating. How did you decide?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there are certainly other churches and other organizations that regulate those churches that would not want it. And then it's sort of more strict. But there are Christian spiritualists that want more of a Christian foundation, perhaps less psychic. The Spiritual National Union, which is one of the biggest organizations in the UK, for them, sort of talking about God is fine, but not so much on Jesus or the teachers of Jesus. And actually, tarot would be excluded from sort of SNU churches. But as I say, as United Spiritualists, the idea is it can be an umbrella. And it's also recognizing where spiritualism has its sort of core faith and belief system, and where there are other similar things that aren't necessarily part of the core faith. So we've had people, for instance, talk about life on other planets and extraterrestrials or aerial phenomena. We say, well, it's not a core belief or principle of this church and spiritualism, but your mind works best like a parachute, as my friend Malcolm Robinson would say. Keep it open. And the idea being that, again, it's understanding what it is they want to talk about and what they want to understand. And actually being spiritual is a very different label to being a spiritualist. Now, I'm a proud spiritualist. I'm a proud spiritualist medium and minister, and I wear that badge of honor. But spiritualism as a religion is still a human thing. We've created it, we've made it, we've labeled it, and I think humans do love labeling things. But certainly what we try and do within my churches and within United Spirits is like, your faith and belief system is private to you. If you're able to respect and embrace other people's, then you are welcome to come and share your ideas. So I didn't mean to overspeak you before.
No, you're fine. Thank you so much for going in depth with that. I just realized something new. I didn't realize that spiritualism is a religion. I did not realize that. So you said something that I've never heard. I also heard, though, within what you said, that there's different branches of spiritualism. So if I may ask, Ash, how many branches are there within the religion?
So within the UK alone, there's at least a dozen big movements or organizations. You know, worldwide, we probably go into the sort of the tens of the dozens. Spiritualism as a religion was actually, it's relatively modern. It was founded off the back of the activity with the Fox sisters and sort of Hydesville, and then the rappings and tappings and sort of knockings. And of course, at that sort of time, you got the Victorian era, Christianity was quite big. So a lot of what spiritualism became grew off the back of Christian understanding and foundations. And then as the knowledge expanded, they brought in other major sort of faiths and beliefs. Now, the SNU, the Spiritual National Union, became one of the biggest, particularly between the UK and the USA. And their principles, their values, if you like, there were 7. And one of their mediums sort of interpreted that from the spirit world. So that's it. This is the sort of cornerstone of the religion. And then, of course, every now and then someone comes along and they're also just as passionate as the medium that brought in the 7 principles, and they think, well, actually, I've got a bit of the jigsaw and I want to add or I want to tweak. And then different branches, if you like, of spiritualism started to break out. So there's still quite a big Christian spiritualist movement. There's a few in the UK. The Greater World, a beautiful organisation that my dad had worked for at one point, and they channeled messages via a medium, Winifred Moyes, Zodiac, and it was all about the Zodiac sort of teachers. And Zodiac had lived at the time of Jesus, so it's claimed, and therefore a lot of his teachings were probably sort of Jewish and Christian in element, and that was what we then interpreted as Christianity. But United Spiritualists, I feel at home with now as an organisation. It's where I've certificated as a medium, it's where I qualified as a counsellor, and it's where I was ordained. And I love the fact that it's more of an umbrella, and there's a lot more space for individuality. And for me, the reason I wanted to become a minister was to sort of be multi-faith and certainly respectful of all of the religions, and recognizing it's all come from, I believe, the same divine sort of source energy anyway, and it's the human interpretation, and that actually we can build something greater than tolerance. Tolerance is great because it means we're not deliberately causing fights, but when we can move from tolerance to acceptance, inclusion, it suddenly becomes a really wonderful thing. And of course, people then can have different bits of the jigsaw or the puzzle, and it can all lead to the same great picture.
I love your philosophy on embracing all religions, because I feel like what that does, it opens your mind to expansion, and you get to learn more and adapt more. And I love that. I think that's great. I think that's really one of the secret ingredients to life. And
it's the secret sauce.
The secret sauce. That's right. That's right.
Wouldn't the world just be a happier place if you're able to do it? And
so much harmony. It'd be amazing. And I feel like we're getting, even though there's chaos in some aspects, I feel like we're getting closer. There's shifts happening. So people are becoming more awakened. They are asking questions.
Yeah.
They want to be more open. So, and it's individuals like yourself that are starting this movement. So I think that's
I hope so. And I think that I think religion can be really beautiful. Right? But I think religion can be an element of control. And if we look historically, powerful kings, queens, emperors, politicians used religion as a way of telling people what to do, where to be on certain days and certain times, as a way to behave. In modern times, it can be quite a nice culture. And I sometimes joke that even on a Sunday morning in my own church, it's a tea, coffee and cake club with a little bit of clairvoyance, mediumship and spiritualism sort of thrown in, because the culture and community part of religion, I think, is really nice. And actually, within my own family unit, my wife and I have been together 25 years. She's got Irish ancestry. And when I met her 25 years ago, she was Catholic. Now, she would still call herself a Catholic, even though she's also qualified, and she qualified for 2 years training as a spiritual healer. She would describe her religion as Catholic. We've got 3 little boys. So our 3 little boys would describe themselves as Catholic spiritualist or spiritualist Catholic. They actually go to a Catholic primary school, and they're able to have some fantastic conversations. I've got some great philosophers growing up in my family. But the more sort of I've told people about that, we've ended up with people in church saying, well, is it okay if I call myself a Muslim spiritualist? Call yourself whatever you want. Hindu spiritualist, Buddhist spiritualist. I'm spiritual, but not a spiritualist. Is that okay? Yeah, everyone's welcome. And I think that certainly in the USA recently, a poll said that there are more people that would consider themselves spiritual than they would religious now.
Yes.
So I think you're absolutely right. There's this sort of season that a lot of us are feeling inspired to move into, and there's a lot more acceptance and inclusion and diversity, and a lot of the people look and think like us. And actually what was considered typical and then diverse, I think there's this spiritual movement that getting to a space that they realize that they don't actually have to fit. You can have a bunch of misfits that then fit together and still feel at home and feel more authentic, which is lovely.
Yes, that's wonderful. May I ask, Ash, did the spiritualist religion start in the UK?
Officially, I think it would go to USA. So it'd be the Fox sisters in Hydesville, sort of New York State. This is where my geography of the United States is not brilliant, but New York State as opposed to New York City. And it was those Fox sisters that were hearing knockings and tappings, and the intelligence behind the knocking and tappings was picked up by these young Fox sisters. And fast forward a few years, they were able to communicate with that intelligence to realize it was a communicator. It was attached to a personality, and the personality, it is alleged, later was established to have been someone, I think it was a peddler, that had been murdered and buried within the grounds of their house where they'd lived. And through mediumship, as mediumship developed, it got there. And I always like the fact that imagine how slow that communication was, right? Okay, so give me 1 tap for A and 26 for Z, tap, 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 tap. And they would have been writing it all down, and things like that within that era progressed, the Ouija board, the spirit box, and then eventually that level of attunement where the Fox sisters could say, right, I'm actually picking up a personality who's claiming to be a peddler that's been murdered. And they were ridiculed within elements of that as the religion was still growing. But it took a few sort of well-to-do people, particularly that time, upper class, well-educated white men with status, that were able to say, there's something in this. We think this is actually not in competition to our Christian beliefs, but actually taking our Christian beliefs and proving it. And there were some really fascinating things that went on. The Church of England, I'm going to use the word lightly, I hope I don't get criticized, but almost intimidated by the popularity of spiritualism. They commissioned people like Reverend Valauer to go and do a proper investigation, do a deep dive into this, find out what's wrong with it and what's not compatible. And people like Reverend Valauer, at the time of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, all this interesting experiments going on, Reverend Valauer sort of come back and said, well, actually, some really great news. Spiritualism feels like this fantastic movement that actually takes out understandings and proves that some of it is actually real. It proves there's a life after death, that place that we call heaven. There's some evidence here from these people. And it became really exciting. Obviously, not popular within the Church of England. I think Reverend Valauer had to then leave the Church of England, ended up finding a home in spiritualism. But the religion started to grow with these pockets. I think, we owe a lot to the Fox sisters. And Hydesville, sort of around spring and March time, is still something celebrated by spiritual and spiritualists all around the world. It's a very sort of important time.
Wow, that's very interesting. What would qualify? Let me ask this. If you had to, when it comes to the Spiritualist Church, if you had to say one thing that separates the Spiritualist Church from other churches, and also one thing that combines the Spiritualist Church with other congregations, what would that be?
I think I'll take them in reverse, if that's okay, because the obvious things are teachings around love, and in particular unconditional love. There's a huge thread for almost every religion and sort of church around this condition of love and loving unconditionally, being loved unconditionally. And the other element of that is service. The opportunity to give service, to deliver service, but not at your expense, only when you can, and to dedicate part of your day to service, to serving your friends, your brothers and sisters, and doing that sort of stuff. I would say that's a common thread. And actually, to a certain extent, the power of prayer, I think, is another strong belief. Positive affirmation, positive thinking, prayer, that power exists within all the sort of churches. I think as a separation within spiritualist churches, particularly in the UK, there's less reliance on one book. Within my church, we accept the leadership of Jesus Christ. So there's some really powerful stories within the Bible that are there, but there are also powerful stories and prophets within the Old Testament and some of the Judaism sort of teachings, Islam, Buddhism, and Hindu, Sikh, the prayer books. All of those things are really important. And the idea is you could actually pick up, say, channeled messages from the guide Zodiac, which Winifred Moyes had picked up, and that book could be really important to you. It could be a book written by a spiritual healer. So there's less reliance on a single book, and I think the fact that there's less rigid rules. I think that within, say, the Church of England or the Catholic Church, there's a set of rules, regulations, and it's like you can't colour anywhere other than inside the lines. And I think that within lots of spiritual churches, and certainly a spiritualist church under United Spiritualists, there's a lot of freedom to colour outside of the lines, and there's a lot of freedom to sort of say, right, as long as I respect those principles, that this is going to be okay. And actually that means that you might end up with 10 people in a spiritualist church, and if you ask them what it means to be spiritual, they'd all have a different answer. Whereas I think if you were to say to someone in my Catholic church where I was married, what does it mean to be Catholic? I'd like to think that probably 7 out of 10 would probably say the same thing. So I think the principles probably slightly tighter in other mainstream churches. Having said that, there are spiritualist organizations where things are a bit tighter, and actually there's probably less acceptance of you colouring outside of their lines. Mm-hmm. But I would say almost all of the spiritualist churches, certainly in the UK, and for those I know in the USA, Canada and other places, Japan, Australia, actually the 7 principles that was interpreted by the SNU, they kind of get interpreted, reinterpreted, translated. They kind of exist as a foundation. This continuity of the personality after death, the belief in personal responsibility, the belief that for everything you do, good and bad, there is some sort of consequence or karma or cause and effect, the power of prayer and the communication with ministry of the angels, spirit beings, helpers, and spies. So even though the language is slightly different, I would say that there's a sort of more of a common thing there. Hopefully that answers that.
Oh, yes, indeed. Very in depth. May I ask, you had stated that you're an ordained minister within the Spiritualist Church. Do you do sermons are you like the main ordained minister at your Spiritualist Church?
So I'm part of a team of ministers at my church. I'm quite lucky that there is a team of us, and I'm a third generation spiritualist. So I was born into a spiritualist family. My mum and dad were already involved heavily with spiritualism. My dad was already an ordained minister in the late 1970s. My mum became a minister a little bit later. But my granddad had come to the Spiritualist Church in the 1970s, long before I was even born. So for me, being brought up within that sort of spiritualist movement gave me the opportunities to do that. And actually, I spent years as a young person saying to my mum and dad, I hope you don't mind that I won't follow in your footsteps. Because I was quite happy practicing my religion without having to necessarily come to church. I never saw the church as the only place I could worship or practice my faith and belief. I always saw God, I think certainly as a young person, perhaps as more of a supreme being or beings, this great architect of the universe. And as I got older, actually, I started to see God as more of an umbrella term to describe the sum total of everything, this divine force, a bit like Star Wars, the Force, and that God was maybe the word I'd use to describe it all. And actually, if the divine code, that secret stuff, that made everything, then actually God would be just as happy me worshiping him out in the mountains or out by the sea or out in the park, because all of these things were part of sort of the creation itself. So yeah, I'm one of the ministers. I practice my religion by giving demonstrations of mediumship. I run a lyceum, which is an old spiritual term for sort of teaching, particularly with my young kids. I'm trying to bring them up with real acceptance and tolerance of every faith. A couple of times a year, I'll run sort of workshops. But our divine service is something that happens every Sunday morning at our church in Wimbledon. Our sister church at Hatbridge, which has only just got going again, sort of in that post-COVID normality, doesn't have a particularly religious service, but it has a regular mediumship night. So I can practice my religion by doing some mediumship, proof of mediumship there, but I can do spiritual counselling and healing sort of in between at sort of pop-ups and one-to-ones. Every time we do a divine service, our divine service is about 90 minutes, has about 30 minutes mediumship, has 10 to 15 minutes of either automatic speaking, some sort of channeled sermon, inspirational teaching, an address of some sort. It will have like a spiritual reading. We could read from any one of spiritual sources, or indeed for the Bible if we wanted to. Sometimes there's some music. There's always a healing moment. So our sort of divine service is that opportunity to come in and sort of preach. Now, my mum and dad are both ministers and presidents of the church. Our vice president, Ivan Lee, and I, obviously, at the sort of the second line of that, but we have a lovely lady called Reverend Leslie Moulton. She's our principal tutor for spiritual healing as well, so she can do that. And we have about half a dozen other ordained ministers. Now, some of them come in as and when needed. They've got various levels of mobility and sort of health, but it means that when we're asked to, say, conduct a funeral or wedding or a baptism, a christening or a naming service, it can go out to the team and we can see people get a bit of choice in who they would want. But every Sunday, rather than have a minister of religion at the service, we have a guest medium and then a chairperson. And the guest medium and the chairperson work together every Sunday to deliver that divine service in the same format.
Wow. Very interesting. I wanted to ask Ash, as an ordained minister of your Spiritualist Church, when you do have the opportunity to speak within the congregation and give a sermon, what inspires you to come up with a topic or a quote or scripture or whatever it may be? What sparks the word of the day?
Yeah, no, really good question. And I think for me, it almost happened by accident, because I think that by starting to do the inspirational or inspired or sort of talking, that's actually what then brought me back to the pathway to be a minister. So during the first lockdown in the UK, a friend of mine that is a producer of Spiritual Psychics TV, he said, you've got so much lovely philosophy, Ash. Why don't you share that? A lot of people are at home, we'll get you on Zoom and we'll start showing this. I said, do you think people will be interested? Everyone loves the free readings and the psychic stuff. And he said, no, you talk about your faith and belief. And I actually still run the show now. So it started in 2019. It's called Being Spiritual. Sometimes we go out on Facebook or YouTube or sort of TikTok. And hopefully some of the people listening to this might go and find me on TikTok. And I just thought, what am I going to talk about today? And I looked through one of my books and thought I might talk about what is God today. And my first show was my understanding how I recognize God, and started talking a lot about energy. And I thought, well, where did some of that come from? And I realized that my guides and my guide team were like, we've been waiting, like coiled springs. We've been waiting for you to open your mouth and let us do some talking with you. And I realized that I had this entire team of guides. I was aware of 2 or 3 of my guides, ones that helped me with healing or mediumship. But I had this entire sort of philosophy network behind me. And a friend of mine whose philosophy I loved while I was alive, a guy called Ralph, he was like, well, I'm your chairperson. He said, you've got an executive committee. They all sit around the table. This is Sais from ancient Mongolia 10,000 years ago. And this is Bear. He was a Native American Indian in Virginia. And this is Giles. He was a Harvard professor. And there was all this people around the team. They're like, hi, we're here to share our pearls of wisdom from the spirit world. And the more I was able to do the Being Spiritual show, the more I was able to talk, I just kept having different subjects that I would go to them. It would be something I'd read in a book. And then because the show was live, we made it interactive. And I was like, what do you want to know about today, folks? You could ask me anything. And as the questions would come in, I felt that I didn't have to do the research in the same way. For God, I'd gone off and done loads of research on what I was going to say about God, and then they took over. The live show, a bit like we're doing now, I don't know what the questions are, and I actually think I perform better. I'm neurodiverse, and I can sometimes panic and become overwhelmed. And actually, the idea to just relax, sit in that moment, and then go with what spirit has sort of taken to you, it becomes something that I'm familiar with, and I'm giving permission. They're not in control of me like some sort of trance. It's still me talking about it. But that's where it comes from. And actually, that led me to say, actually, I think I want to be an ordained minister of religion, and I want to be able to do this more. I want to take my knowledge of life after death out to more people. I want to take what I now believe are the truths of spiritualism out to the biggest, widest possible audience. And I want to do this in the most inclusive way. So Mum and Dad, I think you do a great job. I'm not going to do it just like you, but I want you to help me and give me this foundation to build up on. And that's where it became really exciting. So from a sermon point of view, I take inspiration from the audience or the day. And as I say, as a medium, mediums would do this within spiritualist churches in the UK. So most churches that hold a religious service would say to the medium, we're going to do this song, we're going to sing this hymn, or someone's going to read. And the medium will sit there thinking, I've got no idea what I'm going to say. And then something in the reading will inspire them, or something from the song will inspire them. Or it could be the unfolding of the day or your day. And most people take that inspiration from that. And I find, that I'm able to react. And actually, it suits my busy life as a dad with 3 boys and another full-time job, that Spirit can just say, look, just surrender, Ash. Give us a little bit of space. We'll do all that work. We know when you're going to serve that church. We'll start doing the work. You just surrender and sort of go with the flow. But there's this huge elastic pull, which I think's taken me towards an element of perhaps my destiny in terms of where perhaps I even chose to incarnate with. It's this idea of just sharing my knowledge without any real justification, saying it's my opinion and opening people to interpret me. I get to take this spiritual sort of development, a spiritual step each day.
You actually answered a question, unless you want to add on to it, that I was about to ask. And what I was going to ask was, as an ordained minister who's also a husband and a father, what positive, encouraging advice would you give to other men that are ordained ministers, husbands, fathers, that are struggling to balance all of it and still be able to stay intact themselves spiritually, if that makes sense?
No, it's a really good question. I would like to add to it. I think that being spiritual isn't about being perfect. It's about being committed to perhaps the mission and understanding about this life and this experience, because we only get to live this life once, right? So we got to get the best out of it. And I think from a general philosophy point of view, this life is about experiencing everything possible in pursuit of happiness, doing things that make us happy with people that make us happy, being able to love unconditionally and sort of receive that. So you need to prioritize those things. I've got a very sympathetic wife that, not only sort of deals with the competing priorities of a busy full-time job, but my sports and my rugby, my hobbies, as well as my church. And I think that at the core of it, it's understanding what your priorities are and prioritizing them. On a good day, I like to think I get the balance. I've had moments where, without a doubt, I'm not prioritizing my marriage. I'm prioritizing the kids, and they're alive and well and entertained and fed. But actually, I realize that I'm maybe taking my marriage for granted. I'm making a lot of assumptions. I'm not making the same effort to communicate. And actually, even if I'm doing some great service within a sort of spiritual church, that is my foundation. That's the life and the experience that I've potentially chosen, certainly sort of carved out for me now. So knowing what's really important, being blessed about that, counting the small blessings. We spoke a little bit about the pandemic. It feels like such a long time ago, fortunately now. But the idea of being blessed, I've got a roof over my head today. I've got food in my fridge. I've got heat. I've got immediate health. Being blessed for that and counting those blessings, right? Prioritize those things, and let's prioritize those. We still live in a world, not the Star Trek utopia yet, where we don't have to pay for things. So we need money. Money pays the bills and pays for food and pays for experiences. So you're going to have to do those things and prioritize that while juggling love. I've got 3 little boys, and as someone pointed out to me, you might think you've got 18 summers of each of them until they hit 18, but by the time they're 13, you've probably lost that. So that's 13 summers, if you're lucky, with those kids. It's like, right, I want to prioritize those. I want to prioritize those summers, prioritize the family time, carving out the space to do it, because you're no good as an instrument of spirit or as a light worker or a keeper of the glow, whatever you want to sort of call it, if you're exhausted and you're useless. Spirit are patient. They will, and to a certain extent, I'm not special. I've not been chosen by the spirit world to work with. They want to work with all of us, right? And we've got different missions for all of us. To a certain extent, I could even say, well, actually, you're meant to be doing this podcast, and that's what spirit have got in mind for you. But everyone can work with the gifts of mediumship, the gifts of healing. Everyone can work with that power in the universe. And actually, therefore, spirit aren't fussy. They'll wait, and they'll know when it's important. So, prioritize the things that are most important. Count those blessings. Know when to say no. Know when to stop. And keep on keeping on with everything else. Recognizing that a bit like a diet. One blip doesn't mean it's the end of the pathway. Actually, you overcome and adapt and move on to through that next season.
Great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. If there is a listener or a viewer that is watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, and they're like, okay, I'm very curious about the Spiritualist Church, but I don't know where to start. How would they go about getting more information into this religion?
Fortunately, in 2025, there's so much out there on the internet now, and there are great directories. Within the UK, there are several directories. Most of the organizations I mentioned will actually have a directory of then all of their prescribing churches and centers. So as United Spiritualist, you could go to the United Spiritualist website and it would show you all of our churches which are, if you like, certificated with us all over the world. The SNU have exactly the same. The Greater World have the same. And the other important thing is that combination of social media and the good old World Wide Web, just Googling, where is my local spiritualist church or spiritualist center? I mentioned I'm neurodiverse, I've got dyslexia, so knowing how to spell I think is really important. There's a big difference between spiritual, spiritualist, spiritist, particularly in sort of South America. So know what you're looking for. If you're looking for like-minded people with a spiritual umbrella, search for that. If you actually want to find a spiritualist church, which type of spiritualist church do you want? Just the one that's closest to you, or one that has some Christian undertones, one that's a bit more sort of open? So yeah, get yourself out on the internet. If you're getting good with AI, and of course living through the revolution of AI, which is why I always say please and thank you in case the machines do decide to take over one day. But yeah, you use that AI, use the internet search engines to find out what's out there. Do a bit of research, and then wait for the pull. Don't just go to the first one. What is sort of smart and whizzy? What is the one that's attracting you? What is the one with that sort of bit of a pull? Because the church shouldn't just be sussing you out and making sure that you're a good fit for their congregation. You need to suss out that church and that community and make sure it's a good fit for you. So yeah, the other good thing is word of mouth, and podcasts like this and seeing who's on there and who they're sort of talking about. See what feels good for you. What is it you're learning again? Perhaps in this life for the first time, but it feels right with you and you want to align yourself with that.
That's right. Great answer. I'm loving these in-depth answers that you have. Thank you so much. I would like to ask, as an ordained minister, Ash, how are you able to discern when to step into that role and when to step into your mediumship role?
So I think discipline, ethics and values are the sort of important lesson there. So mediumship, without a doubt, I think has become the sort of the glossy front page on the brochure for spiritualism. And a lot of people associate clairvoyance, clairaudience, even psychic messages to a certain extent. Oh, that's spiritualism. It's all about mediumship, seances and stuff like that. Actually, that's just one of the gifts that as a spiritualist person we sort of talk about. So for me, there has to be some ethics. Recognizing that anyone and everyone can work with the gifts of mediumship, and that there is a life and perhaps several lives and dimensions sort of beyond this one. It's understanding when it is right to do that. So part of me sitting in a development circle was understanding those ethics. I'm writing a book at the moment called Spirituality Simplified, and I've actually just written a chapter today all about ethics and my own sort of personal ethics. And a lot of that is, so I don't ever read unless I'm being asked to read for them. So I would never tap someone on the shoulder on the bus and go, hey, I've got your second cousin twice removed here that says they know where you dropped the keys. Even if I had the second cousin twice removed telling me that. For me, they have to give enthusiastic consent. It's not okay to tap them on the shoulder and say, is it okay if I read for you? If it's meant to be, they will find a medium and they will ask that for medium. It's not like Ghost Whisperer in Hollywood. There has to be that professional standards and ethics. And you have to develop a robust relationship with your guide team about when it's appropriate to be on duty, off duty. Now, as a spiritualist minister, I'm almost on duty all of the time. Anyone could suddenly find themselves gravely ill and in hospital in need of those sort of final moments, that sort of power of prayer and healing. So it's about having mechanisms where people can request absent healing, where they can ring me and say, we want you to come to the hospital because this person's dying, we want you to be there. There's a funeral, are you available to do that? Whereas the mediumship, it's almost like a service that you can book now and you can schedule. It shouldn't be sloppy. It should be intended. It should be deliberate, and it should come with those sort of code of contacts. And that level of professionalism that comes with it is treat it like a service. And particularly, I mentioned the consumer regs earlier on. Make sure that someone's going to get what they pay for or what they sort of ask, and then checking that is what they want. Sometimes people come into a church and they'll say, "Oh, I really want to see the minister." Okay, no problem. We'll arrange. What do you want? I want to know if I should continue to date this man or date this woman. It's like, well, that's fortune telling. We don't do fortune telling, mainly because the future's not yet written. You might, through mediumship, get an opinion of your nan or someone like that that can see some scenarios blooming. But actually, what you want is probably something a bit more psychic. You could work with some oracle cards because your energy might influence some of the things that are going on. But actually, the future's not definite, because I could tell you, yeah, you got to dump them. And then you go out and dump them, and it was the worst mistake you ever made. It'd just be me and my opinion. You can't trust necessarily. Now, if you're an astrologist, we've got an astrologist or other readers, and they go, "Oh no, it's all aligned. There's no such thing as free will." As a spiritualist, I do believe in free will, and I think that free will often throws a massive spanner in the works, because it's other people's free will that influence your destiny, and your free will that influences theirs. There's not an absolute rule. On planet Earth, there are laws which cannot be changed or influenced by the spirit world. Free will, one of them. Otherwise, we'd be born with all the knowledge of everything from the spirit world. So yeah, know which hats you're wearing. Know when it's appropriate, have a personal set of values and ethics, stick to those, and also be disciplined both with spirit and the congregation. And I'd just like to add that there's another element of that, and I think it's probably what gives some elements of mediumship a bad name, is that mediumship attracts really vulnerable people. Some of the most vulnerable people in the world. They've gone through bereavement. They've gone through a loss. They're desperate to connect with that person. So you have to recognize that if really vulnerable people are coming to you at a vulnerable time in their life, that you've got to be really professional. And I think for people like me that have been brought up in spiritualism, life after death is just a matter of fact. No proof is necessary for me. For someone hoping there's a life after death because someone they know has just died, they want evidence. And if they're a non-believer, no proof is even possible. But if they're open-minded and they want that, it could almost become addictive. Suddenly, you've connected them back to their mum, and they love speaking to their mum. So they now think the only time they can do that is through you. And there are mediums out there that say, I'll charge that client every single day to them to talk to them. I think within spiritualism, we sort of say, you can talk to your mum all the time because she goes home with you. She doesn't stay with a medium. She's your mum, and she lives in this place I might call heaven. She can hear you all the time. And actually, over a period of time, you could work out the vivid dreams or the vivid sort of interpretations in your mind, what that communication is. And for me, again, that's the ethics. And actually, I like to pride myself on giving good evidential mediumship. And actually, after I've given a reading, people go, I want to book another one. I go, okay, so let's look in the diary for next year. Well, next year, I want one next week. You don't need one next week. Oh, I do. There's more things I haven't learned. It's like, I don't want you to become addicted to this. But part of the religion involves mediumship. There are people that come to church every single Sunday and they sit at the back of the church hoping that they're going to get a message from their loved ones. And I think that's slightly different for seeking out a medium. And I've seen people spend their fortunes trying to get the evidence they're looking for, trying to get the communicator. And I don't believe as a spiritualist medium that I'm a DJ and that I can take requests. That's why I always used to say to the Irish Catholic side of my family, I'm not disturbing the dead. If they don't want to talk to me, they don't. I can't request, I can't summon. The communicator chooses whether or not they're going to communicate. And in that element, that ethics has to be present in order to know which hat to wear.
Wow. You said some really powerful things, especially when you had said that you tell your clients, I don't want you getting addicted to this mediumship, because I too have seen people become addicted to that. And you're right. They'll spend their life savings. They'll do anything they can to get the answers. But I think what's happening in that scenario is we're not listening to our intuition enough. We're not trusting ourselves enough to use our intuition to make the right decisions, or seeking God to make those right decisions. We're relying on, I just had the word, we're relying on instant gratification. We need to know that we're right. We need to know that this woman's coming to us, that our grandma misses us. It's these instant gratifying answers, the ego, which Wayne Dyer says ego is edging God out. I love that he would always say that, because it's so true. When you use ego to move you in your decisions, then you are now separating yourself, I feel, from spirituality. You're separating yourself from having that enlightenment. So I love that you really emphasize that with your clients. And in a sense, you are educating them, and it shows them that you do care at the end of the day about their well-being and not just about telling them what they want to hear. So I really love that, Ash, that you are about that.
And try and talk to them a little bit wherever possible about what they do need, and I won't mention any names, but I had a client that was absolutely thrilled with the evidence she got of life after death and a communicator. She wanted to see me almost every day. And I then said, look, is it okay if we spend some time doing a bit of spiritual counseling afterwards? And afterwards, we asked a couple of questions about what's going on in life. And I said, as a medium, I don't want any information. In fact, my golden rule is never feed the medium. Right? Don't give me any information. The less I know about you, the better. And actually, if we've connected on Facebook or Instagram, anything you've got in your social media isn't evidence. Not that I have the time to look at it. So I wouldn't ethically, but I'm a busy bloke of a full-time job and a family of 3 kids. I wouldn't have the time. But that's not evidence. Anything which could be found or stumbled across, no, we don't do that. So that the second part of that is looking for what it is they want. And actually, most people, I think, even through mediumship, are seeking perhaps an element of healing. Perhaps it is the bereavement counseling. Perhaps I can then say, well, are you aware about the power of prayer? You could come to the church and it's a free will donation. You could go and see one of the healers, the healing team. We can do absent healing. I can, with your permission, send you absent healing right now. And I can do that every week when I send them absent healing prayers. So I think it's helping people find out what's there. And actually, that client recently gave me some feedback. They've been having healing every week at the church. It's a free will donation. So the idea is if you've got something you can donate towards the upkeep of the church, great. If not, don't worry. Our healers are there giving up their time. And they said to me, it's just what I needed, and my anxiety is reducing. And I realized now that, there was my communicator saying X, Y, and Z, and actually I wanted that. And I realized I just needed to heal myself and work on me. And I was really pleased about that. Now, I recognize there are people out there that do this for a living. And actually, they're reliant on those clients and the regularity of their clients. And I'm not going to come down on them and sort of criticize, but I think we do have a moral responsibility to explain to people that there's a difference between working with gifts and talent, right? So you and I can both draw, but one of us might be more naturally gifted at drawing. If we go off and take drawing classes, if we spend more time drawing, we'll get better at it. And I think mediumship's a bit like that. So anyone can communicate with people in heaven. I often find it sometimes easier to communicate with strangers I don't know than I do my own relatives, but anyone can do it. So I'm not specially chosen, I'm not specially gifted. Hopefully, because of my personality and the way that spirit can interface with me, means there's an element of talent and discipline and investment I've put through learning development, which would make me a worthwhile medium to be honored enough to channel, one of your sort of guides. But I'm not otherwise special. If you like coming to me because of my humor, my personality, the talent I bring to the way I deliver the mediumship, and that's entertaining, brilliant. But this is not entertainment. You shouldn't come to mediumship for entertainment. If you're entertained and uplifted as a result, I think that's probably mission accomplished, but it shouldn't be that reason.
Yes. Wonderful. We are nearing the end already. I can't believe it. It went by so fast of the podcast. And before I end this episode, Ash, do you have any websites, social media platforms, your book that you mentioned that you would like to say for all of the viewers and listeners checking this episode out today?
Thank you so much. That's a kind of channel. And folks, I do hope that you've enjoyed listening to me. You can find me online, and my socials are at Ash Robinson Medium. That's at Ash Robinson Medium. For those of you that prefer to use the good old-fashioned website www.ashleyr.co.uk. That's ASHLEY, R for Robinson.co.uk. And as I say, my sister church, Hatbridge Spiritualist Church in Surrey, and Wimbledon in South London is my mother church. All of that's available online. Watch this space for the book, Spirituality Simplified. If it's any good, maybe Danielle will have me back and I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about it.
Yes, wonderful. And thank you to all of you for watching and listening on another episode of the Estrella Podcast. I am Danielle Miranda, and don't forget, if you would like to check out the beta launch of the Estrella platform, please head over to estrellaadvisors.com. Thank you, Ash, so much for sitting in today. I've enjoyed speaking to you and getting to know you better.
I've loved it. Thank you so much, and sending love, light, and laughter to everyone out there.
Have a great day.
Thank you.